This is the sickening truth behind the That 70s Show. Okay, so Danny Masterson, who played Steven in That 70s Show, just got sentenced to 30 years to life in prison for rape. He was first accused of sexual misconduct in 2017, which kicked off an investigation by the LAPD. And in June 2020, he was charged with raping 3 women, including his former girlfriend, in his Hollywood Hills home between 2001 and 2003. But a clip has recently gone viral of Conan O'Brien telling Danny Masterson that he will be caught for what he's doing in 2004. Just watch this clip because it's absolutely insane.
Like my friend Buddy Elfman, he always teases me and he says, "Hi, my name is Danny Masterson. Would you like to touch my balls?" You know, an imitation of me. Because certain words
why are
you
you
just
asking
can't get
people
away
to do that? That's the more important question.
I mean, you got them.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Accent aside,
Everybody can grab.
that's the more important thing.
Exactly.
I've heard about you. And you'll be caught soon. I know you will.
I will.
So yeah, do you think that was just all a coincidence, or did Conan O'Brien know what he was doing?
This woman claimed she was being arrested for being too pretty. She's now been convicted of murder. Hind Bastami is a 29-year-old woman from Las Vegas. In 2022, she was arrested at Harry Reid International Airport after leaving a restaurant without paying. When she was arrested, she told people that she was being harassed by police because they'd never seen anybody as pretty as her. She was apparently intoxicated at the time. She told them she was going to spit on them and she accused them of trying to R her. A few months later, she was arrested for a far more hideous crime. Dispatchers received a 911 call from her on the 26th of October 2022. It was around 2:30 a.m. She stated, "I think I killed my mummy," and she was referring to her 61-year-old mother. Her mum was Afaf Hassanan. She admitted on the call to breaking a glass table over her mum's head. She stated on the phone to the dispatcher, "I broke the table on her head and I cut her neck off." Officers found the killer in California covered in blood. Her mum's body was at her home in Vegas. Hen stated that the pair had had an argument over cigarettes and it had escalated. She was charged with second-degree murder with a deadly weapon, but she pleaded guilty but mentally ill. She was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison.
Does Family Guy know something that we don't know?
Carter, you found a cure for cancer? Well, I didn't come up with it. A couple of eggheads I hired did. One of them's a Chinese. Boy, I don't like those people. But holy crap, wind them up and watch them go. How long have you had this? I don't know. When was that Who Let the Dogs Out song? You've had this since 1999? You know when Who Let the Dogs Out came out? It's a song about dogs and letting them out. I could have you arrested for breaking in here. Carter, you've discovered the holy grail of modern medicine. Why the hell would you keep it buried like this? I'll tell you why. Because there's far more money to be made in treating a disease than in curing it. Why cure someone of cancer in a day if we can treat them for a lifetime and bill them every step along the way? What? That's insane! Carter, what you're doing here is criminal, and I'm going to tell the whole world about it. Is that right? Who's going to believe you? The internet? You'll be just another nutjob left-wing blogger. Security?
So yeah, I find this extremely interesting. Because everything is done on purpose and not everything is a joke. So what do you think? Do you think Family Guy knows that we found a cure for cancer? Or do you think they're just trying to get people talking like I'm doing right now? Either way, this is extremely mind-blowing, and just imagine we did have a cure for cancer and they're just holding on to it for more money.
A man who SA'd and impregnated a 14-year-old child has been ordered to be physically castrated. Glenn Sullivan Sr., pictured here, is a 54-year-old S offender from Springfield. He recently pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree R. This was after repeated attacks on a 14-year-old child. During these attacks, he actually impregnated her. In a bid to evade justice, he then threatened her and her family if she spoke up. Police launched an investigation in July 2022 when the victim bravely came forward and told police of what had gone on. She explained to authorities the horrors that she'd gone through. It transpired that the 54-year-old groomed the girl and threatened her into staying quiet. Officers have applauded the young victim for coming forward and showing extreme bravery. Now, due to the fact that this man actually impregnated this girl, DNA evidence has been used to prove that he was the biological father. He will serve a 50-year prison sentence as part of a plea deal, but prosecutors have requested for him to be surgically castrated. The judge in this case has agreed to this, and the procedure will be carried out by the Louisiana Department of Corrections.
These parents killed their kids because they thought they would come back to life. Okay, so it was late COVID period and the older sister Alicia, who was 27, learned some superstition rituals online and read many books, and she started taking it extremely seriously and convinced her parents and younger sister to believe her. Now there's two sides of the story that could have happened. One, the parents believed the two daughters were possessed by some spirits, and they just killed them hoping they'd come back to life. And the other and most popular one is that Alicia convinced both of her parents to kill her and her sister because they would come back to life. The parents then bludgeoned their two daughters to death, believing full-heartedly that they would come back to life within 24 hours. Her younger sister was hit in the head to death by a dumbbell, and Alicia was killed by a trident. And after killing both of their kids, the parents just patiently waited for their daughters to come back to life. That's when the police walked in on the gruesome scene and arrested them. This might just sound so insane you might not believe that people could actually do something like this, but it was a time in the world where everything was extremely fragile and nobody knew what was going on. So this family literally just went down a rabbit hole on rituals and spells, and completely believed it and acted on it. This case is extremely disturbing and I know a bunch of you have never heard about it, so let's talk about it.
La Tienda de Mario. So in 2020, right, there was this guy who uploaded on Facebook that he was opening a piñata store in Guadalajara, Mexico. It would start off nice, but then it started getting weird when the workers started reporting stuff being moved, getting thrown. We hear voices in the back room. He ends up putting cameras in the store because he's like, yo, I'm done with this. And the cameras, you literally see the piñatas move by themselves. He starts posting all this shit on Facebook, and then a chaman reaches out to him like, yo, I could help you out, let me like clean your spot. So he goes, he visits it, and it was this one specific piñata, a Moana piñata, and that's the one that was cursed OD. So what he does is like, he tells him put some candles and record it, and then that started moving. It appeared the next morning in like the bathroom. That people didn't even want to come to the store, workers didn't even want to work there. But the scariest video that was captured throughout this whole bro, is the one I'm about to show you. This happened after he got rid of the piñata. The chaman took it, started getting more hectic and hectic and hectic. He even made a replica of the piñata. Wasn't the same. It got destroyed.
What am I supposed to be looking at?
You'll see it. And the next morning, what he found was hair.
Was that an actual person?
Bro, nobody knows what the fuck that was.
There's no way. There's no way, bro.
There was like a bunch of fucking paranormal activity. He ended up closing down the fucking store, and how much paranormal activity was reported, nobody even wanted to go there. He couldn't even.
This teenager laughed as he talked about how he killed his mum. In a notebook, he'd written, "You can't spell slaughter without laughter." It was 2012, and Melanie Davis was a 45-year-old mother living in Tennessee. Now, Melanie was raising her two sons on her own after her husband had tragically passed away 6 years earlier. Her youngest son, Zach, had been really struggling since his dad's death. He'd been hearing voices and he'd become really withdrawn. He'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he wasn't actually receiving any active treatment for this. The oldest son was called Josh. On the 10th of August, the family had been out that night to the cinema. They returned home and both Melanie and Josh separately went to their beds and slept. Zachary, though, had a different idea. He got a sledgehammer from the garage and took it to his mum's bedroom. He then launched a vicious attack, hitting her over the head multiple times. He ensured that his mum was dead before trying to set fire to the house with his brother Josh still inside. He used whiskey and petrol to start the blaze, but luckily Josh escaped. He smelt the smoke and fled the property. Neighbours rang authorities and police rushed to the scene. Melanie was found deceased and Zach was tracked down. Chillingly, when he was questioned about the attack, Zachary actually said that he regretted not going and killing his brother with the sledgehammer too. When recalling how he killed his mum, he actually started laughing. 2 months prior to him going on trial, he was interviewed by Dr. Phil. In the haunting interview, he chuckles about his mum's murder. He told Dr. Phil that he'd killed his mum because, quote, "she wasn't taking care of my family." He then admitted to laughing while he killed his mum. He was eventually given a life sentence plus 20 years for attempted first-degree murder and arson.
This is the case of Tamawaki Hamasu and Sweepstakes Life. Basically what this was a Japanese reality TV show in 1998.
Oh, okay.
He's an upcoming comedian. He's promised fame if he enters the show. He gets blindfolded, put in a van, taken to a random location, and they just put him in a room with nothing in it, bro.
If I'm correct, don't they strip him down of clothes?
So they tell him to get naked, bro, completely. The reason why they call him Nasubi
Is it because of his genitals?
translates to eggplant. His genitals were being covered by an eggplant. The whole show. And basically what he has to do, the only way he could get stuff in the room, any type of food, any type of anything, bro,
Is by like applying to these sweepstakes.
and the only way he could get out completely by making 1,000,000 yen in sweepstake winning. He was in there for a year by himself in one fucking room with nobody to talk to. At one point he gets like a stuffed animal, he starts talking to it and stuff. He was surviving off of dog food, bro. He was fucking thugging it out, bro. He doesn't even get no clothes the whole time. But there's people saying that low-key this shit was rigged. Motherfuckers were altering the prizes. Such a coincidence that the only piece of clothing he got was panties that don't fit him. But
It makes sense, cause this is the first ever form of live streaming, right? You want people to keep on coming in.
well, the thing is, it wasn't live streaming at first. At first, it was weekly episodes. They saw how much fucking attention it was getting that they decided to live stream it and get as much money as possible. And he didn't know he was being live streamed 24/7, bro. And then he wins. They surprise him with some big feast. He eats OD good. They take him to a carnival type, and then they blindfold him one more time.
Damn, it's kind of like just accustomed to it, so it's kind of like.
But after that, he ends up beating it mad fast. But they never told him, so they kept upping and upping and upping the price
Fucking dickheads.
because they wanted to.
This man murdered his girlfriend's infant son after the baby wouldn't stop crying. This is 31-year-old disgusting man Kane Mitchell from England. So Kane, at the time that this happened, lived with the boy's mother, 29-year-old Lucy Smith. Sadly, at the time, Lucy's son was only 2 months old, and his name was Teddy. So, according to reports, Kane was over at the flat one evening, and Teddy would just not stop crying, which is a very typical thing that babies do. And after growing frustrated, Kane grabbed the baby, began shaking Teddy violently through the air, and then slammed the baby's head down on a hard surface. After all was said and done, Teddy had 17 rib fractures, fractures to his right collarbone, a fatal skull fracture, and brain, spinal, and eye injuries. Sorry to have to tell you this, but this is just really disturbing, horrific stuff. After Teddy's death, authorities looked into Kane's past and they were horrified. As it turns out, Kane had an extensive history of abusing his partners, and that the children of one of his previous partners were put with child protective planning because of Kane's presence. So Kane was already known to authorities and was a violent man. The warning signs were there, and yet for some reason he was still allowed access to a child. It also took the child's mother, Lucy, a significant amount of time to call the ambulance after her son was attacked, and she was eventually found guilty of cruelty to a child. If you dig deeper into this case, you'll also find that Lucy lied to authorities to try cover for Kane. But at the end of this TikTok, I want to remember Teddy as the beautiful baby boy that he was. And hopefully by sharing these stories, we can help start conversations about this sort of a thing and prevent more crimes like this from happening in the near future. If you want to hear more true crime stories like this, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This former sheriff's deputy just pled guilty to SAing a woman that he arrested. His name is Michael Martinez. He's a former sheriff's deputy in New Mexico. So he assaulted a woman that he was arresting in the back of his cruiser, and he tried to destroy the video evidence. This happened back in 2023. He was found guilty on April 23rd. He gets a maximum of 10 years. And then afterwards, he gets 3 years of supervision. I thought this was going to be some sort of life sentence, to be honest with you, or at least like 30 or 40 years. More details on the incident. He reported to an accident scene. Apparently the woman was driving while intoxicated. He apparently then brought the woman to a medical center for clearance, then handcuffed her, and that's when it happened in the back of his cruiser. Then after that, he brought her to the detention center where she was being held. Originally, he was going to be charged with deprivation of rights, and if convicted, he would have faced life in prison. But instead, he was charged with violating civil rights. I don't know. I still think he should have gotten life for this. This is obviously an extreme abuse of power in this case. Especially trying to destroy the evidence after, like, dude, come on. Let me know what you guys think about this case in the comment section below, and as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
After his 3 young sons disappeared from his home in 2010 without ever being found, John Skilton told authorities that he gave them to an underground group possibly tied to the Amish community. In late 2010, Tanya Zuvers and John Skilton were going through a divorce and custody battle over their 3 sons, 9-year-old Andrew, 7-year-old Alexander, and 5-year-old Tanner. So John picked up the boys for Thanksgiving 2010 per a court-ordered visit and was supposed to drop them back off with their mom the next day. He took them back to his home in Rensselaer, Michigan, where they were last seen playing in his backyard. So when the next day came and Tanya couldn't get a hold of John, she went to his house, but he wasn't home. Instead, he was at a hospital without the boys, being treated for a broken ankle. John reportedly told hospital workers that he injured his ankle while trying to end his life. So Tanya called the police, who were able to get into John's home to try and locate the boys. But they weren't there and the house was destroyed. While being interviewed, John's story of where the boys were at changed many times. First, he said that they were with friends, then he said that he gave them to an unknown woman, and finally, what John is sticking with is that he gave them to an underground group possibly tied to the Amish community to keep them safe from abuse. John's phone records showed that he was in Morenci early November 26, then his phone pinged in Holiday City, Ohio, about 25 miles from his house, and then his phone was shut off. It was then turned back on and pinged back in Morenci 2 hours and 15 minutes after he first left Michigan. Authorities heavily searched for the boys, but it turned up nothing. John won't tell anyone where his sons actually are or if they're even alive. But apparently this was not the first time that John took the kids from Tanya. He took the kids out of school just 2 months before their disappearance and allegedly took them to Florida, where his parents lived. John and Tanya divorced after this, and she was granted custody of the kids just before they went missing. At the time, John drove a blue 2000 Dodge Caravan, and authorities are hoping that witnesses may still come forward. This age progression photo was released in 2020, showing what Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner would look like at 19, 17, and 15 years old. But to this day, not a trace of them has ever been found. As for John, he was arrested in 2011, and while he hasn't been charged in connection with the disappearance of his sons, he was charged with unlawful imprisonment and sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. And if he's not granted parole, he'll be released from prison on November 29th, 2025.
When a man asked his wife to buy him alcohol, no one could have guessed it would end in murder. Danielle and Skylar Nemetz met in October 2012 on Facebook. Danielle was a junior in high school in California and was described by friends and family as bubbly and friendly. Skylar lived close by and had just graduated. They hit it off after connecting in person at a sports game where Danielle was cheerleading. The relationship started progressing really quickly, and Danielle actually ended up moving in with Skylar and his parents. Now, this was quite concerning considering the change in Danielle's demeanour. She was a lot more reserved than usual, and Skylar made no real effort to get to know her loved ones. Just 3 months after they met, Skylar proposed to Danielle. She accepted and then worryingly decided to drop out of high school. They ended up tying the knot just 5 months after meeting. Skylar was working in the army at this point, and the pair ended up moving away to Washington as he was stationed in Fort Lewis. Interestingly, the pair enjoyed spending time at shooting ranges. Skylar spent her time with her new puppy, and she also got a job. Although she was away from her loved ones, she did stay in touch. However, red flags about the relationship would be noticeable even from afar. Behind the scenes, Skylar was abusive to Danielle. He was controlling and had issues with jealousy and alcohol. Danielle told a friend that Skylar had smashed her phone in a fit of rage. In 2014, Skylar asked Danielle to buy him alcohol for when he got back from battlefield training. They were actually both under 21, so Danielle knew she would have to get someone else to purchase the alcohol. Danielle ended up contacting some guys that she knew who were over the age of 21. However, when Skylar found out about this, he would be incredibly jealous and angry. It was the 16th of October and Skylar just returned home. He ended up drinking, and Danielle was on FaceTime to one of her friends, and she seemed just her normal, happy self. Minutes after she hung up the phone, she would be dead. A neighbour called police to report gunfire. They arrived to the scene to find Danielle dead. Skylar had shot her and then put all of the firearms in the house away and also disposed of the alcohol. When police got there though, Skylar was acting like he was really distressed. He was calling out for his dead wife. Skylar claimed that he'd accidentally shot her while putting away weapons for the day while she was doing some work on the computer. However, that doesn't make sense as to why he didn't then call an ambulance as soon as it happened, or tried to revive her in any way, or get any sort of help from anyone. It also doesn't explain why he wasted so much valuable time hiding weapons and alcohol. At the murder trial, texts from Skylar to Danielle were shown which displayed his emotional abuse. A friend of Skylar also testified at the trial about how angry Skylar was to find out that guys had bought the alcohol. The jury ended up really torn. They felt like Skylar seemed rehearsed and over-exaggerated in court, but then they said so did the friend who testified against him. They felt that it hadn't been proved entirely that Skylar did intend to shoot Danielle, so he was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter. He was given just 13.5 years in prison.
An illegal underground bunker was just found in Yakima, Washington while searching for missing 5-year-old Lucian Munguia. Lucian disappeared from Sarge Hubbard Park on September 10th of this year, and if you need more information about this, go look at my previous video about him down below. Lucian's family received a tip that he was being held in an underground bunker somewhere near the park. And when his dad Juan and other searchers investigated that tip, it led them to this bunker between Keys Road and the Yakima River on a remote lot that's property of Yakima County. The area had previously been searched multiple times, but the entrance to the bunker was hidden beneath heavy layers of dirt and tree branches, making it really hard to find. The bunker is 6 feet deep, includes multiple rooms, a propane hookup, and a heater. It's extremely creepy. According to Juan, they found nooses, weapons, scuba suits with holes cut out of the private areas, and a bunch of masks. So they took a bunch of photos and notified the Yakima Police Department. But even though the tip proved somewhat accurate, there was just no sign of Lucian there at all. This is the third illegal underground bunker found in Yakima this year, and they're all allegedly built by the same man, who's 61 years old and has been homeless in the area for years. This man was arrested in 2018 after police discovered another bunker of his in the Yakima Sportsman State Park. He pleaded guilty to second-degree malicious mischief and was sentenced to 90 days in jail, which is the max for that crime. According to court documents, this man has multiple previous convictions dating back to the 1980s, such as assault and lewd conduct. This is extremely concerning considering he's choosing parks where little kids play at to build these underground bunkers on. And while there isn't any connection to Lucian yet, this should still be a PSA. Authorities are saying there really isn't much they can do besides issue an eviction and clean up the area, so beware. Lucian's family is offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to Lucian's safe return. It's coming up on 2 months now, and we really need to find Lucian. If you have any information regarding his disappearance, please call the Yakima Police Department at 509-575-6200.
This is Peter Scully, one of the worst pedophiles in world history. I'm about to tell you his story, but seriously guys, this one is incredibly disturbing. It's so dark, and viewer discretion is really advised for this video. So Peter Scully, he's still alive. He was from Australia, he had a family there, but he was engaging in criminal activities and he eventually fled the country and moved to the Philippines. And this is where the darkness really began. While he was in Australia, Peter Scully started up an international child sex abuse ring. The things that were done to these kids are, I can't even talk about them here on TikTok, but he also started up a pay-per-view video service. And with these videos, he was producing CP, but one of the most extreme forms of CP that can possibly be produced. So how did all this happen? Well, when he was out living in the Philippines, Peter Scully had 2 Filipina girlfriends. They would go out to the streets, they would find kids that needed money or looked impoverished, they would bring them back to the house they shared with Peter, and the things that went on afterwards are literally unspeakable. Remember, like I mentioned before, Peter was the head of an international ring of people that enjoyed the abuse of kids, and he provided videos for these clients. But his most infamous video was titled Daisy's Destruction. This video that he produced was so extreme, so hardcore that people on the internet, when they heard about what happened in the video, literally thought that it was an urban legend, and they thought that there was no way this could be real. This is an actual screenshot of the beginning of the video. This is a screenshot from the very beginning of the video. In the video, 3 young girls are repeatedly tortured for hours and hours on end by Peter Scully and his 2 girlfriends from the Philippines. They are beaten, they are sexually abused. I can't even describe, like I said on TikTok, some of the things that happened in this video. And 18-month-old Daisy. Now keep in mind that all of this was on camera. That's the most disturbing part of this. One of Peter's victims actually ended up dying. They were buried in his house. And this sick individual literally sold that video footage across the world. And what's even more disturbing is that there were lots of people willing to pay to see that video. I'm not kidding. People were paying $10,000 to view this video. That is absolute insanity that there are people that sick out there in the world. And this is only the beginning of the crimes that this guy carried out. Some of the other stuff that we're going to touch on is absolutely disgusting. It's just horrific. And the story of how Peter Scully was eventually identified and arrested is extremely captivating. I'm going to run out of time here on this video, but if you want to see a part 2, let me know below. This story is far from over.
This is Maxwell Brack, and he killed 24-year-old Kajavia Globe. This happened back in 2015, and the footage behind me is him going to the ATM after killing her and draining her bank account. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to a minimum of 70 years in prison or a maximum of 100 years. So he basically got life in prison. Kajavia Globe is right here, Maxwell Brack is right here. Her parents reported her missing on December 11th. She was found about 4 or 5 days later. She was found inside of a trash can. During the trial, Brack denied any involvement in this crime and even testified about their personal relationship, how they met in high school. He had 5 previous misdemeanors and 2 felonies before Kajavia Globe's death. Many of her family members spoke up saying how much they missed her, and they even claimed that he was ruining her life. The weird thing about this case, though, they found her car abandoned and determined that there was some sort of struggle happening there before the crime was committed. However, the medical examiner and the toxicology report determined that the cause of death was indeterminate. They couldn't really figure it out. So this ended up being pretty mysterious at the end. Let me know what you guys think about Kajavia Globe's case in the comment section below, and as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
This is one of the most sickening and disturbing cases I ever covered, and it will make any true crime fan's stomach turn. This is the case of Jennifer Dougherty. This case took place in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is a relatively small area. Jennifer was 30 years old and was extremely kind and sweet. She loved to dance and she trusted everyone she ever encountered. This is because she had some mental disabilities, and this disability even affected her keeping up with her peers in school. And she always got bullied and teased, but she always chose kindness over anything else. She then started going to this community center when she finally thought she met her friends. And these supposed friends were Angela, Peggy, Amber, Melvin, Ricky, and Robert. And you will soon find out why they weren't her friends. These 6 people all lived together, and Angela was 17, who was pregnant with Ricky's baby, who was 23 years old. Amber was 20, who was pregnant with Melvin Knight's baby. Peggy was 27, and Robert was 36. Now remember, Jennifer was 30 years old, but due to the mental disability she had the mental capabilities of a 12 to 14-year-old person. The 6 of them and Jennifer hung out for a while, but soon after, Angela became extremely jealous of Jennifer. This is because her boyfriend Ricky would always flirt with Jennifer when they all hung out. So Angela and Amber came up with this whole screwed up plan. On February 10th, 2010, Jennifer was invited to a sleepover with her friends. And before she left a note for her mom that said, "Have a great day at work, and I love you very much." Right when Jennifer stepped into the apartment house, she was subjected to 36 hours of extreme hell. The group went through her purse and stole money, gift cards, and her cell phone. They poured liquids into her bag, hit her head with filled soda bottles, cut her hair, painted her face with nail polish, and dumped liquids and spices on her head. They then took turns violently hitting Jennifer with a metal towel rack and crutches. Jennifer was also stripped naked, gagged, and then raped by Melvin. They even forced her to drink cooking oil, nail polish, detergent, different medications, and even urine. And keep in mind, this whole time, Jennifer completely trusted them because she thought that they were all her friends. But they were literally dehumanizing her. They then continued pouring all of these things and spices on her head, and Jennifer was crying that her eyes hurt and she couldn't see. But they didn't listen and continued pouring. And after they decided they tortured her enough, they took her life. They then tied her up in Christmas lights and forced her to write a fake suicide note, essentially saying that everything that happened to her was self-inflicted. The first line reads, "I have not been feeling happy for a while now, and I also feel everybody will be better off without me." Which is just sad because that wasn't the case. Jennifer was extremely loved. Once the note was written, they got a knife and stabbed Jennifer to death. And once they knew she was dead, they tied her up in Christmas lights again, stuffed her body inside a garbage can, and dumped it in the parking lot of a middle school, where her body would be discovered by a truck driver the next day on February 11th. Even though Angela orchestrated the whole thing, she avoided the death penalty because she was 17 and a minor. But she ended up getting life without parole. Melvin got the death sentence. Ricky was also given the death penalty, and Peggy, Amber, and Robert were given 30 to 72 years in prison. This case is just so sickening and disturbing, and it stuck with me after I read it, and I feel extremely bad for Jennifer and her family. I wish nothing but the worst for those 6 people who did this to Jennifer.
Imagine going on a family camping trip for your baby to then get taken by a wild animal. Not only that, you then go to prison for your baby's murder. That's exactly what happened to Lindy and Michael Chamberlain in August 1980. The couple were camping at the bottom of Ayers Rock in Australia, and with them they had their 2-month-old daughter Azaria and her older brother Reagan. They were one day into their camping trip and they'd been chatting to another couple who were camping nearby. It was getting late, so Lindy put her 2 children to bed in the tent, and she then went back outside to join the other couple and her husband Michael. Around 10 minutes later, Lindy heard her daughter's cries coming from inside the tent. She went to see what was the matter and she saw a dingo inside the tent with Azaria in its mouth. It ran off into the wilderness and Lindy ran from the tent screaming, my God, the dingo's got my baby." A huge search began with everybody chipping in to try and find baby Azaria. But all that was found were dingo tracks. Police found tracks leading from the tent up into the wilderness, and they stopped at a road. 4 detectives were assigned to the case, and despite other people telling them that there had been dingo attacks in the park in the recent weeks, they didn't believe Lindy's story one bit. One detective in particular was hell-bent on telling everybody that Lindy had killed her baby. A week after Azaria's disappearance, a torn baby grow and a nappy were found at the base of Ayers Rock, near to a dingo lair. They were analysed to see if the tears in the fabric could have been caused by a dingo. Blood, vegetation and hair from the clothing were also analysed, but the detectives started to build a case for murder against Lindy and Michael. Investigators said that the tears in that clothing could have been caused by a pair of scissors, and they allegedly found blood in the car that the family had travelled to Ayers Rock in. They concluded that Lindy had taken Azaria from the tent to the car, murdered her with a pair of scissors, and discarded her body. She was charged with murder, and Michael was charged with being an accessory after the fact, despite there being no evidence, no eyewitnesses, and no body. At their trial, the prosecution told jurors that Azaria had died a quick death as she'd had her throat cut by Lindy, and that the dingo story was a fanciful lie to conceal the truth. There were multiple witnesses for the defence that had been at the campground that night. One of them even said that she'd had to scare off a dingo that night as it had grabbed her 12-year-old daughter by the arm. Another crucial witness was a hitchhiker that Lindy and Michael had actually picked up in their vehicle. He had been bleeding, and that would have explained the blood in the car, but the prosecution managed to convince the jurors that the blood was Azaria's. On October 29th, 1982, both Lindy and Michael were found guilty. Lindy was sentenced to life in prison, and Michael's sentence was suspended. While Lindy was in prison, she actually gave birth to a second daughter, and a petition was started to have her freed. New evidence even came to light saying that what the prosecution said was blood in that vehicle actually turned out to be paint. The petition gained over 100,000 signatures, but it wasn't this that saw Lindy freed. It was actually an unfortunate hiker named David Brett. In January 1986, David actually fell off Ayers Rock and died at the base. When his body was discovered, police began scouring the area, and they found that it was full of dingo lairs. In one of those lairs, they found a tiny white jacket. It belonged to Azaria. On September 15, 1988, all convictions against both Michael and Lindy were quashed, and 2 years later, they received $1.3 million in compensation from the government for wrongful imprisonment, and their names were cleared.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This guy is one of the most awful serial killers there has ever been, and I feel like he's never talked about. In my opinion, this guy's worse than Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer. Hi Meg, I talk about true crime. Let's get into the story of The Butcher, the worst serial killer Canada has ever seen. Robert Pickton was born October 24th, 1949, in British Columbia, Canada. Robert had quite a bad upbringing. His dad was very abusive. He actually grew up on a pig farm. From a really young age, him and his brother had to work countless hours on this pig farm, and then they were forced to go straight to school without taking a shower or anything. Because he was showing up to school unwashed, Robert started getting bullied, and they gave him the nickname Stinky Piggy. As Robert grew older, he was said to be very quiet, but he apparently sometimes had these weird bursts of bizarre behavior. These bursts would come out of nowhere, and he would just start acting really strange. In 1996, Robert's brother opened up a kind of charity thing. The charity was started to try to make more money for their pig farm. It was called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society. And what they would do is they would hold huge parties and raves to try and raise money. And I'm not joking when I say huge parties and raves. 17,000 people were said to have shown up at one point. 17,000 people at once. Sex workers and biker gangs would join these parties as well, but for Robert, it all started going downhill in 1997, when he attempted to murder a girl. I don't usually do this in these videos, but a lot of you ask what blush I use, and this is the blush I use. It's usually £10 on the TikTok shop, but it's on for $5 right now. So if you click right here, you can get it. I just ordered kind of a peachy version of this. I'm not being paid to talk about this, I just saw they were on offer and you guys ask about these all the time, so get your hands on them for cheap while you can. So Robert attempts to murder a woman for the first time that we know of. According to her statement, he attempted to handcuff her and then he started stabbing her multiple times before she managed to get away. This should have been the thing that got him on police radar, but he was able to get the charges dropped, because the woman he attacked was on a lot of drugs at the time, and Robert used that to come up with a story. He told police, like, she was hitchhiking, I was just trying to help her, and she attacked me. And they believed him because she was on drugs. And unfortunately, for the next 60 women he would kill, he was let go. And he was able to come up with a strategy that wouldn't get him caught next time. He developed a plan and started killing a bunch of women. And Robert was really, really good at staying under the radar. Now, what did he do exactly? Let me tell you, because it's disturbing. First of all, he always went for hitchhikers, addicts, or prostitutes. And what he would do is he would promise them money, drugs, accommodation, anything to get them back to his farm. Once he got them back, he would then shoot or strangle them to death. And this next part is why he was given the name the Butcher. He would take the victims' bodies, chop them up, and feed them to his pigs. Now, if you're not aware of this already, pigs will literally eat anything, everything. So the evidence was just, bye. They were getting rid of the evidence for him. All of a sudden, there is an increase in missing women in the area. But sadly, because he only went after sex workers or addicts or hitchhikers, no one cared. And this always makes me so mad with cases like these. Like, they're still human beings, but no bodies were showing up, so there was no crime, no body, no crime. But as the numbers started rising, people were kind of getting a bit worried. A group of people that weren't the police actually got a list together of all of the names of these young women who were missing. They brought that to the police and were like, do you see now? And that's when the investigation actually began into finding out what happened to these girls. And all of these girls had one person in common: Robert Pickton. He was the only person whose name continuously came up when they were looking for these girls. Police needed a way to get onto the farm with a warrant without him knowing about it and hiding all the evidence first. And so they heard that he had possession of an illegal firearm. And so they used that as the cover-up to get onto his property. On the property, they found multiple items that belonged to these missing women, along with some blood-stained clothing and tiny bone fragments. Now, things aren't looking too good for Robert, but because the pigs had eaten all the evidence, basically all of it, they were only able to charge him with the murder of 6 women. And so he got 6 counts of murder. When he got arrested, he actually said that he killed 49 women and that he was sad that he didn't get to round up to 50. What the hell, Robert? What does he want the police officer to say, like, oh, I feel so bad for you? No! He was arrested in 2002, and this trial was huge. Of course, he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But guys, that's not the worst part of this story, because I'm getting to that now. One element of the story that I kept out until now is that Robert sold the meat of his pigs to people who lived around the area. These pigs, who ate the remains of 60 women, were sold to his neighbors. When I say neighbors, I just mean people who live in the area. So like secondhand cannibalism. I could never eat pig again if that was me. So yeah, they were pretty disturbed and freaked out by this information, which is totally understandable and just totally disgusting. After a huge search of his property, police now believe that the number of women Robert killed was in the 60s. 60 women. 60 mother, daughters, wives. It's insane. It really annoys me with cases like these. I know it was like in 2002 and things have changed, but have they? I find that a lot of cases like these that I cover always start with, oh, all these women were going missing, but they were sex workers, but they were drug addicts, who cares? And it's like, it's insane to me that like they're not seen as equals to any other woman walking on the street, but whatever. Hopefully that changes. And for those wondering, I have actually covered this story before, but the quality of the video was so bad that I couldn't keep it up anymore. Like, it really bothered me to watch back, so I thought I would remake it in a higher quality way. I hope you guys enjoyed it regardless, and have a wonderful day. My heart goes out to every single one of the victims, their families, and people who cared about them, and I hope Robert rots in jail. Anyways, this is not a good representation of Canadians. We're actually really nice people. I'll see you all in the next video. Love you guys. Bye.
I took 6 bullets to the head for scoring an own goal. My name is Andres Escobar, and my story is one of the most horrifying in the world of football. It all started on June 23, 1994, during a match with my national team, Colombia, against the United States. This was the second group stage match of the World Cup. After a defeat in our first match, we were desperate for a victory. The tension was high. In the 33rd minute, the United States launched an attack and decided to deliver a cross into the penalty area. I lunged forward to intercept the ball, but tragically it deflected off me and went into my own net, an own goal. This put the United States in the lead with a score of 1-0, and they ultimately won the match, resulting in our elimination from the World Cup. The Colombian people were infuriated with me following that mistake, a mistake that would ultimately cost me my life. A week later, on July 1st, I made the ill-fated decision to visit a nightclub in Medellin with some friends. Little did I know that it would be a decision I would deeply regret. As I left the club around 3 in the morning, I found myself alone in my car in the parking lot. It was already too late at that moment. Out of nowhere, an armed commando consisting of 3 men suddenly appeared and mercilessly showered me with bullets. I sustained a total of 6 gunshot wounds to my head. According to witnesses, one of the assailants even shouted, "Goal," with each shot, cruelly mocking my own goal on the football field. He was later apprehended and sentenced to 43 years in prison for this abhorrent act. I left behind my wife and children, forever altering their lives. Stay tuned for more stories.
John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and SA at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was SAing him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the SAing or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it.
I was dismembered and turned into TV furniture by my son. My name is William Spiller, and this is my horrifying story. At the time of the incident, I worked as a taxi driver and lived with my 28-year-old son, Nathan Robinson, in an apartment in Bournemouth, England. We often had arguments as my son still lived under my roof without taking care of his own expenses. He owed me a substantial sum of £36,000. On May 16, 2013, we had another intense argument, but this one went beyond imagination. In a fit of madness, Nathan killed me and armed himself with a utility knife and 2 small hacksaws to meticulously dismember my heavily built body. The horror didn't end there. He then stored my body parts in plastic storage boxes, stacking them to create a TV furniture piece. He even placed my head in a desk drawer. In the afternoon, my downstairs neighbor noticed pink liquid dripping from the ceiling, a mix of my blood and a cleaning product. Having also heard our argument, the neighbor came upstairs and knocked on our door. Nathan calmly answered, assuring that everything was fine and it was merely a dispute. Later, my son stole £8,000 from me and made a to-do list to avoid arousing suspicion about my death. He paid the rent, rented DIY equipment, and responded to my text messages. In a cruel twist of fate, he even received the DVD Say 7 as a gift shortly afterward. Nathan continued to live his life as if nothing had happened, traveling, meeting people, and going out with friends. It was only a month later that my remains were discovered when one of my colleagues grew concerned about my absence. My girlfriend, Glenys Molino, with whom I had been in a relationship for 2 years, also became worried about not receiving any text messages from me and believed I was with a friend in the West Midlands County. The police then arrived at my apartment and were hit by the overwhelming smell and the presence of numerous flies. They subsequently went to Nathan's mother's house, where he was staying, in Birmingham. My son asked if it was a joke, but eventually confessed to the murder, claiming he was not in a normal state of mind at the time of the act. However, experts had conflicting opinions as he displayed a level of consciousness about his actions, particularly in creating an illusion of me being alive. Nathan's trial took place in 2014, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment.
This island has one of the most disturbing histories in America, and no one really knows the full truth behind it.
So like I said before, this island was owned by multi-millionaire Francis Sheldon, pictured right here. And Francis and a number of other local men from Michigan, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, ran a boys' camp on the island. They would fly kids to the island on this airstrip, kids from the YMCA and other schools and communities in the area. And both the children and the parents of the children who attended this boys' camp were told that this was an island of fun where kids could relax. They had big brothers there. It was going to be totally safe. And this camp ran on this island for a period of years. Then one day, some of the kids who attended the camp began to tell their parents that the counselors or the teachers, the adults that were there on the island, had behaved with them in very, very inappropriate ways. They began telling their friends and parents that they were taken into these cabins pictured here on the island. They were assaulted. They were told to remove all of their clothing and that there were cameras all over the place. Well, it turns out that this guy, the multi-millionaire with political and business connections in the area, Francis Sheldon, was running a massive CP ring. And they had been abusing the children on this island under the guise of bringing them to a boys' camp for years, recording all of it, selling it across the world. And some of the more affluent clients of their business were even allowed to take trips to the island themselves to see some of these young boys. Now, this story bears an obvious resemblance to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, but there are some very, very strange things that are happening here that nobody knows about, and the government still refuses to talk about to this day. So let's talk about this guy, Gerald S. Richards. He was a gym teacher at a local Catholic school who went down for the crimes, and he was heavily involved with every aspect of this business, if you know what I mean. Well, it seems like through his political and business connections, Francis Sheldon was actually tipped off that he was about to be arrested and raided and charged with these horrific crimes. So Francis, before he could be brought to justice for these crimes, he actually fled the country in a personal plane. He then moved to France, got remarried, and died in Amsterdam, and never had to pay for any of the crimes that were committed here. But it's when we start talking about the murders that this story really starts to blow my mind. So take a good look at this guy, Chris Bush. This is Christopher Bush's father, Harold Lee Bush. Now, he was an executive with General Motors, and the family was obviously extremely wealthy. They were politically connected, and they were very connected to every business in the area. These guys had a lot of power. But back to Christopher Bush. This guy had assaulted a number of children. He'd been let out of prison, let out of jail in a very, very suspicious way multiple times, put on bail for serious offenses. And he was an alleged associate of the crime ring that was happening on North Fox Island. Meaning that, like I said earlier, he was one of those people who could afford to actually fly out to the island to do things himself. I'm out of time. Follow for part 3. This is where it gets juicy.
The story of this American female serial killer will make your hair stand up. As if her crimes are not horrific enough, she earned the nickname the Giggling Granny. How creepy is that? Nanny Doss was raised on a farm by a very controlling father, and one of the few joys that she had in life was sneaking into her mother's room and reading her romance novels, and she would daydream about the day that she'd be swept off her feet and have her happily ever after. And she got married to her first husband at the age of 16, and it was a miserable marriage. The couple had 4 daughters together, 2 of which mysteriously died of food poisoning, at which point the husband took one remaining daughter and fled because he was scared to death of Nanny. The remaining infant baby named Florine was left with Nanny, and Nanny picked up and married somebody new. Now this man was an alcoholic, but despite that, they were married 16 years and raised Florine together. This is where the bloodbath really begins. Nanny was in the room right after her daughter Melvina had given birth to her second grandchild, and while Melvina was still loopy from the labor drugs and she was exhausted, she could have sworn that she saw Nanny stick a hat pin in the baby's head. Melvina kind of passed out and went back to sleep, but when she came to, she started asking her family members, did Nanny have a hat pin and stick the baby in the head? And the family regretted to inform Melvina that the baby had in fact died, and yes, they did see Nanny holding a hat pin. However, the doctors couldn't give a positive explanation for the baby's death. The death of the baby absolutely shattered Melvina and her husband, and they started fighting and drifting apart, and Melvina started dating a soldier named Robert, who Nanny did not approve of. And one night when Melvina was out of the house and Robert was left alone with Nanny, Robert mysteriously died, and Nanny received $500 in life insurance that she had taken out on Robert a couple weeks earlier. Not long after that, Nanny's husband forced himself on her, and she didn't like that, so she put rat poison in his corn whiskey jar, and he died that night. Nanny married her third husband only 3 days after meeting him, and he died shortly after this of heart failure. She picked up some life insurance, bought some land, and built a new house. Her late third husband left behind a mother and a bedridden sister who also died shortly after. At this point, Nanny burned the house down, took that life insurance money, and moved on. Then Nanny landed a fourth husband, and at this point her mom moved in with him. She found out that her husband was cheating, so she poisoned him to death, and for good measure, she poisoned her mom to death too. Then she married her a fifth man named Samuel Doss, who was very disapproving of the romance novels that she loved to read. He went to the hospital one night with flu-like symptoms and was diagnosed with a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and sent home. And a few days later, he showed up dead. The doctors were very suspicious of this, so they did an autopsy and found enough arsenic in his system to kill 20 men. Nanny was arrested shortly after this and confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother-in-law, her mother, her sister-in-law, and yes, sadly, even the baby with the hat pin.
This is the woman people are calling the real-life Gone Girl. She faked her own horrific abduction and wasted 5 years of police time. You're not going to want to miss this one. It is absolutely insane. This all begins November 2nd of 2016. Keith Papini returned home from work at around 5 p.m. He was expecting to come home to his 34-year-old wife, Sherry Papini, and his 2 kids, but they weren't home. Keith called the daycare where his kids were staying and asked when Sherry came to pick up the kids. The daycare then told him that she never came, so the kids were okay. He immediately finds this very strange, calls the police, and reports her missing. This was taken very seriously by the police. She seemed to have vanished out of thin air. It wasn't long before the news was reporting on it, and her missing posters were all over California. Because there were no leads, fingers pointed at Keith, the husband. Everyone thought it was Keith. He even took a polygraph test and passed it, but people still thought it was him. That's until 22 days later, when Sherry returned. 150 miles away from where she was last seen, a driver finds her walking on the side of the road in chains. This driver called the police and she was brought in. She was covered in bruises. She had lost weight and her back had been branded. Understandably, police were shocked. When asked what happened, she claimed that 2 Hispanic women abducted her. She claimed that they were going to sell her to a man and that's why she was branded. Police were taking this very seriously. Sherry explained in detail the abuse that she went through and the room she was in. She also described the women enough for them to create a sketch of people who did not exist, because it was all a lie. Police found it very strange that these abductors just let her go, but this isn't to say that they didn't believe her. They definitely did, and they took it very seriously. They were determined to find out who did this to this poor mother of 2. The government helped pay for therapy for her PTSD and anxiety after this event. During this time, police were testing her clothes and they finally found DNA. This DNA belonged to a man, not a woman. And she apparently encountered no men during this kidnapping. They put it through the police database and nothing came up. That's until 2020 when they decided to put it through a genealogy database, hoping that someone related to the person with this DNA went on like Ancestry or anything like that. With this, they were able to find the exact person with that DNA. And this person was Sherry's ex-boyfriend. The story only gets crazier from here, so come back for part 2. It'll be up the moment I'm done filming.
This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.
This is what we know about the 4 Idaho students who were murdered in their house. On November 13th at 12 p.m., 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their beds in a home that they shared. The victims were 20-year-old Ethan, 21-year-old Kaylee, 21-year-old Madison, and 20-year-old Zaina. Just a few hours before Madison and Kaylee were murdered at 1:40 a.m., they were seen on surveillance grabbing some food from a food truck in downtown Moscow. They then took an Uber home, and at around 3 to 4 a.m., their lives were taken. Ethan and Zaina, who were a couple, also arrived to the home around the same time as Kaylee and Madison. There were also 2 other students in the home while the murder took place, but they were not harmed and they said they did not hear anything. These students in the home were also not the ones who called 911, but police will not release that information. Police do believe that this was a targeted and isolated attack, but they do not have any suspects at the moment. In my opinion, I think there's a lot more to this story, and I hate to say it, but these attacks seem really random, and this may be a serial killer.